army can be like a university sometimes, and your professors are not those who necessarily outrank you or who are better qualified than you. Rather, they are those individuals who can teach you how to keep yourself alive. And so here it is. It is what is for me the early days of the Rhodesian Bush War, and I report to our battalion HQ at Cranbourne Barracks, and I find myself the fourth man, very much the junior in a four-man stick. Number one, of course, is our corporal, a tight-lipped individual, a quiet man, never said very much, very capable. He answered every question that I ever put to him with the same four words: don't worry about it. And number three was an equally silent man, a man who seemed to have no opinions about anything. He, for the most part, kept to himself, seemed to smoke one cigarette after the other. And I thought to myself, well, this should be a very interesting 6 weeks with these two silent individuals. But then, walking up to join us was number two, a man by the name of Lofty. And as you can imagine, his nickname described him well. Tall, gangling guy, ex-RLI. He was one of many people who in those days had done their time in the regular army, had elected to make a career for themselves in civilian street, and as the war intensified, they found themselves called up into the Rhodesia regiment. And so here was this man, a happy, smiling guy with an open face. I took an instant liking to him, and he was clever. He really knew about bush warfare, and I hung on to every word. I was in awe of this man, and he seemed to have an almost spiritual connection with the bush. And at times, although he himself was a very articulate individual, he struggled to explain to me some of the concepts and the ideas that he had in his mind. He felt things better than he could explain them. And so we're out on patrol, and the area is quiet. For a number of weeks there have been no reports of any terrorists in the vicinity, and things become very routine. And Lofty takes these opportunities when we perhaps stop for a smoke break or for a rest to speak to me. And I learn from him the very basics and the fundamentals of tracking. And I was fascinated. I had realized that in times past in our history, tracking was a very important skill. But as we had moved on into the mid-20th century, it didn't seem like there were many people who knew anything about it. But Lofty certainly did. And he showed me how to walk next to a trail and take a pace and mark the sand and then count the number of heel prints so that I could estimate how many people had walked along that pathway. Simple, really, really basic things. But he built upon this foundation and explained to me many other aspects. I remember on one occasion we were walking through the bush and we came across some aerial spoor. This is spoor that is, you can't see any footprints. Whatever footprints are there are cushioned by the grass, and the grass is pushed down in the direction that the people have taken. And we walked along it a little way, weary, because there was no indication from the sign on the ground who had made this. And then Lofty stopped, and he bent down and picked up a piece of chewed grass, and he held it out and showed me. And you know, he's the only person that I've ever heard this from. And he said, we may as well abandon this. It was made by security forces. And I asked him how he knew, and he said, Africans, very, very, very seldom will you find them chewing grass. He said, when you pick up a piece of grass that's been chewed, that's a sign of a white man. That's a habit that a white man has. He says, these are security forces. We're wasting our time following this. They've been along here a few days prior to that, and the trail is old. We were walking through the bush on one occasion, and there were moments. The corporal was very much in command. There's no question about that. And Lofty being ex-RLI, I find that they were, because of their regular background, they had a greater degree of discipline, I think, than the rest of us who were really part-time soldiers, part-time civilians, and it seemed like he had a greater respect for rank and authority than perhaps the rest of us had. But I mean, you'd be hard pressed to really see that distinction. But I could see it, and it was there. So the corporal was in command, and Lofty was our number two. But there'd be this subtle switch, and nobody would say anything. But there were moments, perhaps, when things were a little unsure, and it could be a risky situation. And then there was this like change of command, and then Lofty became the stick leader without a word being spoken, and the corporal would leave him to lead and to give instructions, and then when that moment was over, there'd be the switch back to the normal stick organization. And on this occasion, Lofty led us up the side of a hill, very cautiously, and we came to an old terrorist base camp. It was partially hidden under a natural overhang. It was very big, with rocks hangers, and it looked like, I don't know, maybe about 50 people had occupied it at some stage. But that had been long before we ever came across it. In fact, Lofty said it probably hasn't been occupied for about 2 years. He said there's absolutely no trace of any recent occupation here. But it was interesting that he somehow sensed that this camp was on the side of this hill. And he would say to me, the bush is a vast place. He said, but the gooks are not going to go up and down the gomos. They're not going to go crashing through rivers. You've got to remember that even no matter what their ideology is, they are still human beings. And if you know what you are doing, you will know what they are doing. So don't patrol and walk through the bush unconsciously. Always be aware of what you're doing. That is what he tried to stress with me. And he would say, for example, that there were people who would have a tendency to pass an obstacle either on the left or on the right. Now, they may line up something on the horizon and they'd be heading for that. But because they keep going to the right of an object, to the right of an object, to the right of any obstacle that's in front of them, although they're still heading for a mark, they're actually taking it in a big curve. And he said, be aware of that kind of thing. Alternate. Be conscious of it. Go past this tree on this side. Next one, go that side. Next one, go that side. Clump of rocks, go that side. He said, keep doing this and you'll keep yourself on course. And he said, because you are doing some things without thinking about it, you will not be aware that your eyes are taking in the terrain and looking for an easy way to walk. So the gook is doing the same thing. So when there's an obstacle in front of you, maybe a fallen tree trunk or a small little stream or a little donga that's been cut into the ground, you're walking along, and there is, and this is where he struggled to explain himself. He said, there is a certain place when you step over or around an obstacle, there's a certain place where you will feel safest putting your foot. He said, before you step into that place, look. Take a look. Because if the gooks have gone this way before, that is where you'll find his footprint, right there. He said, the chances are thousands to one. He said, but nevertheless, if they have been there, you'll be able to take advantage of that chance. Be aware of what you're doing when you walk through the bush. And in the evenings, we would sit perhaps and wait for darkness before we moved off into whatever spot had been chosen for us to spend the night in. The corporal would, we'd sit around waiting for the light to fade, and he might say, look across that flay, do you see the clump of trees over there on the left? We're going to posse there for tonight. So now you know where to go. But you don't just get up and walk, because you never know who's watching you. And you don't point in the bush. You don't point and say, that's where we're going to sleep tonight. You don't do that. You hardly even look in that direction. But there is a certain moment, and it lasts only seconds at twilight, when it's safe for you to stand up and to move. And I remember on the first occasion when the corporal had said, okay, that's where we're gonna settle down for the night. And I got my stuff together, and Lofty said, wait, not yet, wait. He said, you'll feel it. You'll feel when it is that precise moment when you can get up. And when he got up, I felt it. And to this day, I don't spend much time outdoors at twilight. And where I live, there are street lights, and the whole skyline is lit up. You can hardly see twilight. But when I'm out in the countryside, when I've been there and night falls, I still can feel that moment, that magical moment, when it's time to stand up and to move. And so things were quiet, and I'm learning what I can from Lofty, and we are told to climb up this huge granite feature and to set up an observation post. And I can see that Lofty is, I won't say he's restless, but there's something not quite the same about him. And when we get to the top of this feature, he looks around and he says to the corporal, I'll be back a bit later. And he wanders off by himself in the bush. And I think, well, maybe he's just gone off. He'll be back in a moment or two. But time goes by and time goes by, and he's obviously done this before, because the corporal and number 3 are not particularly worried at his absence. But I'm getting concerned, because I know standing orders, certainly for us, not for the specialist troops, but for troops, territorial soldiers, and I think for other regular soldiers, the minimum in the bush is 2 men. You don't go off by yourself. But now Lofty's gone for a while, and he comes back eventually and he says, okay, everything's fine, we can settle down. And every now and then over the next few days he disappears, and where he goes I don't know. And I ask him, can I come with you? And he says, no, it's all right, it's okay. It's like a flipping Apache, man. So we never had any sophisticated methods of doing observation duties in those days. It was just a question of somebody lying out of sight, not so that anybody on lower ground can see you against the skyline. Just lying flat on your stomach in some concealed position with a pair of 8x40 binos, and just scanning the ground in front of you for ages and ages and ages, backwards and forwards, just looking for anything that seems out of the ordinary. And now and then you'd be relieved for a couple of hours, somebody else would take over, and this was the way it was done. Later on it became far more sophisticated, far more organized, even to the point of where you would document things, and the handover from the one observer to the other would be done in greater detail. So Lofty's out there and he's watching the countryside, and we're a little bit behind him, and we're just sort of passing the day. And the corporal looks up and he says to me, "I think we're running short of water. How much water have you got? How much have you got?" He asks number 3, and he says, "I haven't got much, and I imagine Lofty doesn't have much either. Go to him and ask him to go with you and go and look for some water down at the bottom of this feature. Take all the water bottles in a pack with you, fill them up, and then come back." So I crawl over to where Lofty is, and I say to him, "Lofty, Corporal wants us to go and get some water." So he says, "Oh, this is very interesting." Bino's still glued to his face. "This is interesting. There's a guy, in fact there seems to be a row of them walking one behind the other. I don't know, he's got like one guy's got a chopper on his shoulder. Is that a chopper? No, it looks like, what is that? It's a long bamboo thing. What has he got? Oh." So I say, "Hey man, what are you looking at?" So he rolls over and he laughs. And he says, "Oh, I got you, there's nothing down there." I said, you gave me such a fright. I thought you were watching a bunch of gooks." He said, No, there's nothing moving down there. Come, let's go and get some water before it gets dark." So I get a pack, and we got all the empty water bottles in there, and we start making our way down this feature. And there are huge granite boulders everywhere that time has tumbled down the side of this big hill. And we're picking our way through this. We get to the bottom, and there's some marshy ground, and we walk through this, and we eventually come to some running water. So Lofty says, "Okay, I'll keep watch. You fill the water bottles." So I'm doing this very carefully because I don't want leaves and stuff to go in there. So I'm scooping up the water very carefully with each bottle, and then I hear him, "Psst, hey, hey." And I think, "Oh man, you're not going to get me again now. I'm busy." So I ignore him, and I'm just at that point busy with the last water bottle, and it's about half full, when he grabs the straps of the pack behind me and he yanks me almost off the ground and half drags me to a rock. And luckily, as I was filling these water bottles, I was chucking them in the pack, but I still had this one in my hand. So I got this half full water bottle, and I got my rifle, and I'm trying to hold the cap for the bottle in my other hand, and I'm trying to see what's going on, and I know he's joking, but when I see his face, I had never seen it so concerned and so serious before. So we're crouching behind this big boulder, and he's talking to himself, and he's like rebuking himself, and he's muttering a few curses, and he says, "Wrong time of day as well. I should have known. And I'm still thinking, "Man, are you for real or what?" And I try and look, and he says, "Keep your head down." I can't see anything. I never saw anything moving. Eventually he says, "I'm going to try something." He said, "You watch the high ground over here on the left. If they come up there, if you see movement, just let rip." "Okay." I said, "All right." So I'm watching this high ground over to my left, and Lofty throws back his head. We were always taught in the bush, shh, silent. I mean, there was a whole procedure of silent signals that you're supposed to give when you communicate. Not worried about this. This ex-RLI guy throws back his head and he hollers at the top of his voice, "Cantanga bastardos!" And you just hear this echoing through the countryside. And I'm shocked. Nothing happens. Bush is silent. And he says, "Come, let's go." and we sprint from one boulder to the other. Halfway up the hill he stops, and we're both panting, and he says, the first time I've seen that they haven't fired back. I said, what do you mean? He says, no matter how disciplined they are, you swear them out, they can't keep still, they let you have it. He said, but that's the first time. He said, it was interesting. I said, are you sure there's somebody there? He said, yeah, they're there all right. Come, let's get up before it's dark. We get to the top of the hill. He has a quick word with the corporal. We break camp, we pack up everything. We go down the other side of the feature. About halfway down, we find a cave. Well, I call it a cave because I don't know what else to call it. It's where granite slabs have sort of piled up on top of each other, and there's an opening in there, quite large enough, with sloping ground, stinks to high heaven. And we go in there and we settle down, and I'm thinking, Lofty, I don't know. I never saw anything. I never saw a thing move down there or heard anything. But anyway, I spend the night sitting looking out into the dark, because I think if something is out there, I don't know if they've seen us crawl into this place, but I'm just keeping my eyes open. And I doze off during the night, and the rest of us too. And early in the morning, Lofty starts shaking me in my sleeping bag. Hey, quick, get up. What's happening now? He says, can't you hear it? Can't hear a thing. He said, listen, can't hear anything. He wakes the other guys up. Choppers. And we go outside, and I look in the distance, and I can see some tiny specks in the sky. Fire force. And they come sweeping past us a few minutes later. Man, it was dramatic. Oh, I wish I had a movie camera with me to have filmed that. They were so close to us, just a little bit below the height that we were at. And you could see right into into the alouettes, the guys there. And they went on by. The K car just kept orbiting. And the corporal said, quick guys, we've got to get down onto the road down below, and then off to the village there. There's nothing for us to do here, they need us. But it was such a long walk. We couldn't go down that rock face. It was too dangerous. So we had to go back the way that we had climbed that feature, and then skirt around the base of it. Then we found a road and then walked along the road. It must have taken us about maybe 2 hours, 3 hours, I suppose, before we came to a village. But by that time, everything was over. The fire force, in fact, had left. And we sat there and waited. And eventually, trucks from our company arrived, picked us up and took us back to base camp. And it was just a few days before we demobbed. And we went on home. So I said goodbye to Lofty, and I didn't take any details from him. I just assumed the next time I get called up, he would be there, and we would renew our friendship. And the next time I was called up, it was with a completely different company and with completely different men in a different call sign. And Lofty I never saw again. I watched out for him. I missed him terribly. And it just didn't happen that our paths ever crossed again. I don't even know what his first name was. I knew his second name, and it's the same name as a famous American outlaw. And I won't say any more than that. And I don't know where he is today. But he certainly gave me good advice, lots of things that I don't have the time to recount here. But advice that stood me in good stead for a number of years as the war progressed. So, Rifleman Lofty, Professor of Rhodesian Bush Warfare, I thank you for your counsel and everything that you taught me. I'm sorry that I haven't had the opportunity to post any further videos on YouTube, on this channel. I have been so busy. I know it sounds like an awful excuse, but I assure you it's not an excuse. I'm well, I'm very well, thank you very much. But I'd hoped at one time in my life that when I reached this age I would be able to sit on the veranda and just watch the traffic going by my house. Not a chance, not a chance. I'm holding down effectively what is 2 jobs at the moment, and I leave home when it's dark and I get home when it's dark, and you know, I would love to do more videos. I enjoy this so much. I love sharing my experiences with you, and I've got to just try and get around to doing it. So I'm very sorry, but thank you for your concern. Thank you for your comments, and you in turn, please do take care and keep well. Until next time.